What's up, investors? It's the Russian jet. The Russian budget is not just bleeding anymore, it's hemorrhaging on an industrial scale. Over the past 2 months, Moscow has been torching money at a rate of 500,000 rubles per second. Let me repeat that. Every tick of the clock, 500,000 rubles vanishes into the black hole of Putin's war machine. By the time I finish saying the sentence, this was several million. In July alone, the deficit ballooned by another 1.2 trillion rubles, and by mid-2025, it had already blown past annual targets by near 3 trillion. That's not a forecast, that's a crime scene. It's no longer a mere budget gap, that's a big, gaping hole. And here's the kicker. This is not a one-time shock, like an earthquake or a spontaneous flood. This is a structural collapse. The long-awaited consequence of pretending that a nation can fight a total war, lose its primary energy markets, subsidize dozens of zombie industries, and still act as if everything is normal. For years, Kremlin economists laughed at Western analysts. They mocked the predictions of imminent collapse, pointing to the so-called stability, which they said was low unemployment, which as an economist I'm going to tell you it's not always good. Strong quote-unquote ruble, endless propaganda reels showing factories buzzing with activity and mostly military-related factories. And you already what it probably means. And then they told people, look, we're untouchable. And when the economy did not immediately implode in 2022, when it somehow limped along 23 and 24, many thought that the experts had exaggerated and apparently somehow Russians were right. The analogy of drinker of incompatible for humans liquids would fit perfectly here. I mean, imagine somebody taking a spoon of nail polish remover every day. The first week he is sick but standing. Then he gradually builds to the whole bottle, because the stomach ache was bearable, nothing serious, not deadly. Then the second month he even runs a marathon, and people say, well, maybe it's fine, maybe his body adapted. Maybe acetone is actually good for you after all. Except it's not, it never was. And now, in 2025, the collapse is arriving like a delayed avalanche. The organs fail one by one, the deficits explode, the patient who was bragging about resilience is suddenly flatlining on the table. The real question is not why this is happening. That was already clear, I mean. The real question is why it is happening so fast, right now, and what took so long. And what exactly Putin plans to do with the budget deficit spiraling completely out of control. So today, let's talk about the current and the future state of the Russian economy. Because if the war cannot be ended through conventional, if you can call them like this, regular methods, the economy will do its job fast and without mercy. Because the economy is hard facts and cold numbers. You cannot bribe it, blackmail it, or force into submission. The economy is not afraid of Putin. But Putin thinks that everyone and everything should bend to his will with little to no resistance. And soon enough, he's going to find out the hard way. For 2 years, Russia lived on illusions. All revenues were rerouted through shadow fleets and shell companies, disguising the massive discounts Moscow had to offer India and China. Factories shifted to import substitution, so-called projects that looked impressive on paper, but produced just overpriced junk in practice. Men ripped out of the civilian labor force were pushed into the front lines, and women were shoved into low-paid jobs to cover these gaps. Propaganda then filled in the rest, with endless TV segments about how Russia was, believe it or not, reindustrializing, and then overcoming Western sanctions. And for a while it even worked, at least cosmetically, at least on paper once again. In 2023 and 2024 deficits were big but not fatal, around 1.5 trillion rubles annually. Painful, yes, but survivable. That level of bleeding suggests that Russia could drag the war out for decades, the way the Soviet Union dragged out Afghanistan. Slow-motion collapse that stretched across generations. But 2025 was a turning point. Suddenly, the deficits were not annual, they were monthly. In July alone, for example, Moscow lost more than 1 trillion rubles compared to the entire 24 1.5 trillion. That is the kind of financial trauma that would make even the most hardened dictators sweat bullets. You cannot hide it, you cannot spin it. It's like bleeding out on stage while still trying to dance and pretending everything is normal. Well, it's not. But why did this happen? Because the Kremlin bet on time. They built their 2025 budget on the fantasy that the war would end this year, conveniently around Trump's return to the White House, then this Alaska meeting, all this kind of stuff. It never did. The budget forecast even projected a 25% cut in defense spending. They imagined that by summer, the war machine would wind down, defense contracts would shrink, and subsidies for drone factories and tank plants could quietly dry up. Debts across the military-industrial complex could be buried, unpaid and then forgotten once the battlefield went cold. Instead, the war escalated. Drone factories multiplied, ammunition plants expanded, and the infamous Yelabuga dorm for 40,000 drone workers, which was not even supposed to exist by mid-2025, well, there it is, sucking resources like a bottomless pit. What was meant to be the end of the poison binge turned into another round of chugging acetone straight from the bottle, and now the patient is collapsing faster and harder than anyone planned. But how the financial wizards of Russia were able to sustain this near-death experience for so long? Let's answer this question in our next chapter. Enter the finance ministry with its dead serious reassurances. According to them, all of this was just, believe it or not, part of the plan. Overspending in January, planned. Oil revenues falling short by 20%, planned. Tripling the deficit in just 7 months, totally planned. It's financial gaslighting, a Kremlin specialty. The ministry is essentially saying, yes, we spent more and earned less, but somehow the totals are still aligned with the projections. It's like telling a doctor, yes, I drank poison, yes, I stopped eating, yes, I have organ failure, but don't worry, my weight is exactly as I predicted to be, so why should we worry? It's relatively healthy, right? But the reality is much uglier. Russia's debt picture is catastrophic. The government is borrowing at record speed. Contractors in the defense industry are up to their necks in liabilities, waiting for bailouts that will never fully come. Banks are being forced to hand out loans to zombie enterprises, obviously in the military-industrial enterprises, with the full understanding that they will never see full repayment. And the regime's most dangerous illusion is that debts can be erased once the war ends. That was the gamble. Let everyone rack up obligations and then just simply default when peace arrives. But peace never came. Instead, costs surged. Now Moscow is not just paying yesterday's bills, it is funding today's expansion. That means financing new drone dorms, missile plants, and mercenary contracts, all while carrying the crushing weight of old debts. This is not controlled deficit. This is a train heading at 100 miles per hour towards glassware store. And the Kremlin is telling the passengers that, relax, everything is, you guessed it, everything is under control, even as the brakes fail. And here is the catch. The debt crisis does not just live on paper, it seeps into daily life. Regions that were promised subsidies suddenly find them cut. Hospitals go unfunded while billions are shoveled into the war. Inflation eats away at pensions. Ordinary Russians are forced to pay higher utility bills and so-called special fees for local development. You guess which ones are those, right? Every ruble that vanishes into the military-industrial sinkhole is a ruble stolen from the basic survival of the state. And once the illusion of stability breaks, it will not just be the numbers collapsing, it will be social trust, already hanging by a thread. And just theoretically speaking, do you think it is possible that Putin is planning to put Russia on military tracks indefinitely? Will Russia survive if a war simply never ends? Let's answer this question in our next chapter. If this was just mismanagement, it would be bad enough. But the sheer scale of the deficit suggests something darker. Preparation for another potential war. And the whisper point in one direction, well, you guessed it, the Baltics. Riga, Vilnius, Tallinn. Ukraine has become a meat grinder, too costly and too uncertain. Kyiv is unattainable, Odessa remains out of reach, but the Baltic states, well, they look like a low-hanging fruit to Putin's paranoid strategists. A 60-kilometer Suwalki corridor connects them to the rest of NATO, a vulnerability openly discussed by Western generals. And then Trump's second term poured gasoline on the fire. His blunt declaration that America will not defend Eastern Europe was like Christmas morning in the Kremlin. Suddenly, the impossible looks tempting, and you know Putin, very tempting to say the least. I mean, just look at the pattern of moves. A lightning-fast crusade against WhatsApp and Telegram, which were crushed in months rather than years. We also, by the way, spoke about it in one of our previous videos, so guys, if you missed it, go ahead and watch it. Then electronic draft notices rolled out overnight after 2 years of stalling, drills for shutting down mobile internet across the country. These are not random policies, they are preparations for wartime lockdown. A regime does not switch off communications channels and then tighten mobilization tools unless it expects it to need them soon. And the ballooning deficit fits this pattern perfectly. Why hoard reserves if you are about to close the door on Western markets with another invasion? Isn't it just maybe, quote-unquote, once again, better for them to spend everything now, such as arm, build, borrow, before the sanctions hammer drops again? What looks like reckless overspending may, in reality, be a war chest in disguise. And if that is true, then the deficit is not just economic disaster, it's a red flag for an imminent geopolitical catastrophe. Every empire eventually collides with the math. The Soviet Union could not defy grain harvest forever. Nazi Germany could not fuel its tanks with ideology. And Putin's Russia cannot run trillion-ruble deficits month after month without something breaking. The problem now is not whether Russia can sustain a long war of attrition. The problem is whether it can sustain itself at all when the very structure of its finances is imploding. As we see it, there are only 3 ways out, and all of them end in collapse. The first is hyperinflation, printing rubles to cover the shortfall, shredding whatever remains of savings and destroying the ruble's value. The second is default, failing to honor debts even to allies like China, and then detonating whatever is left of foreign investors' trust. The third is cannibalization, stripping regions, households and businesses bare to feed the war machine, forcing ordinary Russians to shoulder the deficit directly. None of these are solutions, they're just slow deaths in different costumes. And here is the terrifying part, at least for Russia. Putin may decide that if collapse is inevitable, it should come with fire and smoke. If domestic arithmetic no longer adds up, why not just gamble on a geopolitical reset by invading the Baltics? Why not drag NATO into chaos and hope destruction buys time? In the twisted logic of a cornered autocrat, starting another fire might look like the only way out to survive the inferno at home. That's why the deficit is not just numbers. It is a warning to possible madness to come. The deficit is not just a line on a spreadsheet, it is a countdown clock. And when it hits 0, it will not just be the economy that collapses. It will be the state itself. Whether this avalanche of spending is driven by desperation, delusion, or preparation for another war, one fact remains. Arithmetic always wins. Empires do not fall because of speeches, they fall because of numbers. And the numbers in Moscow are already screaming. And just like every other similar experience in the past, the people who should listen the most are completely deaf to the problem. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work and help us stay independent, you can become a Patreon member for additional chapters at the end of each episode. Thanks much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell.